I remember the exact sound of his card hitting the hospital desk. Not a slap. Not a drop. A placement. Deliberate. Final. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence he had already decided to write. The billing administrator, a thin woman in a pale blue blazer who had, up until that moment, been speaking to me in that particular tone people reserve for stray animals and unpaid debts, went completely, absolutely, terrifyingly silent. I was lying in that hospital bed with 3 cracked ribs, a fractured cheekbone, a concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like needles, and a bill that had just been printed. 620 million Korean wons won. Approximately 500,000 US dollars. My mother, calling me every 3 hours from Enugu, didn't know. My brother, whose university fees in Abuja I had been riding through Seoul's winter nights to pay, he didn't know either. Nobody knew. And then Kim Dae-hyun walked into my hospital room. Not his assistant. Not his driver. Him. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the bill, still folded on the nightstand. He picked it up. He read it. And the expression on his face wasn't pity. It wasn't even anger. It was something far more dangerous than both. It was offense. He set that bill back down and turned to the administrator, who was trying to make herself smaller in the doorway. He handed her his card, matte black, no logo visible from where I lay, the kind of card that doesn't need a logo because everyone already knows, and he said 7 words in a voice so flat it could have been used as a surgical instrument. Clear it. Then come back to me. She left. He finally looked at me then. And I don't have the words, even now, even after everything that came after, to describe what it felt like to be looked at by Kim Dae-hyun. Not like a problem to be solved. Not like a charity case. Like something that belonged to him. Something someone had been foolish enough to touch. Let me take you back. 6 months before that hospital room. Before the cracked ribs.
Before the sound of that card on that desk.
Back to the night I first learned the smell of jjangmyeon at 2 a.m. in the business district of Uedo could be simultaneously the most depressing and most comforting smell in the world. My name is Ifeoma Adaeze Okafor, 24 years old. From Enugu, Nigeria. Linguistics and Korean Studies graduate student at Yonsei University, or that was the plan anyway, before my scholarship was cut by 40% and my brother Emeka's tuition at Ahmadu came due at the same time. I became a delivery rider. Not a romantic one. Not the kind you see in the K-dramas, breezing through cherry blossom petals on a bicycle, hair flowing. I'm talking about the real kind. The late night, cold finger, scooter that smells like someone else's regret kind. The kind that shows up at your door when it's raining and you still don't tip. My scooter, I called her Mom Ngozi, God forgive me, had a crack in the left mirror and a heating handle that only worked on the right side. So my left hand was always 1 degree above frostbite on the Han River Bridge runs. I wore 2 gloves on that hand and still woke up some mornings convinced my fingers had filed for relocation. But I was good at this. Frighteningly good. Seoul is a city that reveals itself to delivery riders in ways it never does to its official tourists. I knew which Gangnam side streets were always mysteriously clear of traffic at 11 p.m. I knew which security guard at which building would wave you through without scanning your app if you showed up with bulgogi burger from the right place. I knew the rhythm of the city, like a language I'd taught myself in the dark. KDH Logistics. That's how I first came to know that building. A glass and steel tower in the heart of Mapo-gu, 42 floors of quiet corporate power, the kind of building that has its name on a small, tasteful plaque near the entrance rather than blazing it across the skyline, because it doesn't need to announce itself. Everyone in Seoul's shipping and logistics world already knew. KDH Logistics controlled approximately 30% of South Korea's freight movement. Port operations, cold chain distribution, regional air cargo partnerships across Southeast Asia. The kind of infrastructure that makes every product on every shelf in every convenience store in this country possible. Kim Dae-hyun built that empire from his late 20s, though the full story of how was the subject of no small amount of whispered speculation in Seoul's business circles. I knew none of this in the beginning. To me, KDH Logistics was just a building with late-working employees who ordered an unusual amount of galbatang and spicy tteokbokki after midnight. I must have delivered to that building 40, 50 times over 6 months. Security at the lobby would call up. Someone from whatever floor would come down. I'd hand over the bag, confirm the app, and leave. I was furniture. I want you to understand what I mean when I say that. I don't mean it with bitterness. It's just the truth of late-night delivery work in a city like Seoul. You are a function, a system. You ring the bell, you hand over the food, you get back on your scooter. The cold doesn't care about your name. The rain doesn't ask where you're from. The city keeps moving. 3 specific times, I delivered to the 38th floor, the executive floor. Twice it was a junior staffer who came to collect. Those times blur together now. But the 3rd time, the elevator doors opened and Kim Dae-hyun himself was standing there, still in his full work suit at 1:15 in the morning, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid English to someone clearly in a different time zone. He reached out his hand for the bag, without looking at me, still talking. I handed it over. He turned and walked back toward the office. And then, and I have replayed this moment more times than I can count, he paused. He didn't turn around. He just paused, and then kept walking. I went back down in the elevator, got back on Mapo-gu, rode home through the Hongdae neon, past the late-night Pojangmaka carts, past the street performers still drawing crowds near the university district. I thought nothing of it. I was furniture. It was a Thursday night in January. Seoul in January is not the gentle, picturesque cold of holiday cards. It is a serious, ancient cold. A cold that has opinions about you. The Han River goes gray as concrete. The wind off it cuts through your jacket and keeps going like it has somewhere to be on the other side of your spine. I had 11 more deliveries on my queue when Mapo-gu's engine cut out. Not the coughing, stuttering death of a sick engine. A sudden, contemptuous silence. She simply decided she was done. Right there on the service road behind the Mapo-gu financial district, 2 blocks from KDH Logistics. I sat on the curb with my helmet in my lap and did something I very rarely let myself do in Seoul. I prayed out loud, in Igbo. Not because I thought God was specifically monitoring the Mapo-gu service road at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, but because sometimes you need to hear your own language in the cold, even if the only ears it reaches are yours. I was still on the curb 20 minutes later, on the phone with the dispatch line, when the security guard from KDH Logistics, an older man named Park S.I. who had waved me through the lobby gate more times than I could count, appeared at the service road gate. He'd seen me from the booth camera. He brought me hot barley tea in a paper cup. He didn't say much. He just set it down next to me, nodded like we were old friends who had already discussed everything that needed discussing, and went back to his post. I drank the tea. I waited for the emergency mechanic. I thought about Emika's tuition due date. I thought about my landlord's very specific face when she reminded me that my deposit was overdue. I thought about my mother's voice at 6 a.m. Enugu time, already cheerful, already certain her daughter was thriving in Seoul. I was so deep in my head that I almost didn't notice the 2 men. Almost. They came up from the Mapo underpass. Long coats. One of them with a phone out looking at something on the screen, then looking at me. There was a quality to the attention that I recognized immediately. Women develop this sense. You develop it or you don't survive. I stood up, put my helmet back on. Instinct, not plan. One of them said something in Korean. The kind of Korean you don't learn in language school. Where are you going? I said I was just leaving. The other one stepped to my left. What happened next took less than 4 minutes by the hospital's later estimation, based on the bruising pattern and injury severity. It felt much, much longer. I remember the sound of my helmet impacting the concrete, that specific hollow crack that sounds like a melon splitting, and thinking distantly that helmets are not actually designed to protect you when someone slams your head into a wall. They protect you when you fall off a bike. I remember the cold of the pavement pressed against my cheek. The strange smell of street grime and fryer oil from somewhere nearby. The specific angle of a neon sign down the block, red characters advertising a karaoke room, cutting across my vision as I tried to keep my eyes open because some part of my brain understood that unconscious was worse. I remember one of them saying a word I didn't initially understand, spitting it out above me like punctuation. 별표 배달부, 별표 delivery person. And a second word, quieter, that I understood completely. I won't repeat it here. You can imagine it. There is a particular category of slur that crosses language barriers with effortless fluency. I don't remember the security guard appearing. I learned later that Park SSI ran out of his booth when the camera caught the confrontation and called the emergency line with one hand while opening the gate with the other. I don't remember the ambulance. I came back to awareness in the elevator of a hospital, watching the numbers rise, thinking about Emika's tuition, thinking about how I had 3 more deliveries in the queue, and the app was going to penalize me. I'm telling you this so you understand what invisible costs. Kim Dae-hyun found out the way powerful men in closed industries always find out things that happen in their orbit. Immediately. And completely. Park SI had worked for KDH Logistics security for 11 years. His emergency call went to the company line first, as protocol required. The incident report landed on the floor manager's desk within an hour and on Dae-hyun's desk before 7 a.m. He was there when I woke up. I didn't know it at first. I woke slowly, through layers of painkiller and concussion and the particular disorientation of a Seoul hospital room in winter, where even the light feels imported from somewhere colder. My first conscious thought was, 3 cracked ribs. I had apparently been told this already and retained nothing. The room was quiet. Then, I turned my head. He was sitting in the chair by the window, still in a suit. Had he slept? Had he left? I had no idea.
He had a folder open on his lap.
He wasn't reading it. He was watching the street outside. I said, in the croaked, mortifying voice of someone who has been unconscious for 15 hours, Dae-hyun SSI. I'd never spoken his name before. I didn't know why I said it so naturally.
He looked at me.
That look again. How do you know who I am? I told him. About Mom and Gozi. About 6 months of late deliveries. About the 38th floor, 1:15 a.m., the time he took the food bag without looking at me. Something moved across his face. He said, "You're the delivery rider." Not a question. A recognition. And something else in those words that I didn't fully understand until much later. A quality of reckoning, like a man realizing he had been walking past something important without noticing. "You work for me," he said. I started to correct him. I worked for the delivery platform, not him. We had no employment relationship whatsoever, and he cut me off. Not rudely. Just with the certainty of a man who has not been interrupted in a professional context since approximately 2019. "You delivered to KDH Logistics. You delivered to my floor. You were attacked outside my building. In this city, that makes you mine to protect." I stared at him. He said the words I later came to understand were the most dangerous words Kim Dae-hyun had ever spoken to anyone, because when he said them, he meant them in the most literal, most consequential way possible. "You work for me. And in this city, that makes you untouchable."
He stood then,
straightened his jacket, went to the door. "The bill," I said. My voice was still wrecked. "I can't. There's no way I can." "There is no bill," he said without turning around. I heard him speaking to someone in the corridor. Low, rapid Korean that I caught enough of to understand the shape of. Investigate. Names. By night, the billing administrator appeared shortly after with a new expression. And we have already heard that part of the story. He didn't just clear the bill. He bought the floor. The entire 4th floor of Asen Medical Center's Trauma Recovery Wing, 6 rooms, 2 nurses' stations, a private consultation area, became, for the duration of my recovery, a KDH Logistics facility. That's the only way I can describe what happened. His security team ran access checks on medical staff before each shift change. There was a man in a dark jacket sitting outside my room every night whom nobody had introduced to me, but whose presence communicated everything that needed to be communicated. My lead physician, a round-faced, perpetually harried Dr. Lim, pulled me aside on my 3rd morning with the expression of a man recalibrating everything he believed about the Korean private healthcare system and told me that in 20 years of practice, he had never seen a patient's recovery environment secured quite like this. "Your employer," he said, clearly uncertain of the right word, "is very concerned about your well-being." I told him Dae-hyun was not my employer. Dr. Lim gave me a look that said, "Miss Ifeoma, I have read the paperwork and I respectfully disagree." I called my mother from the hospital room. She asked how I was. I told her I'd been in a small accident on my scooter, Told her, not the truth, never the truth, because my mother has a heart condition and 17 years of practice worrying about things that haven't happened yet. She made me promise to eat properly and cited 3 specific Nigerian home remedies for bruising that involved ingredients unavailable in South Korea. I told her I would find them. She knew I was lying. We both knew she knew. This is the architecture of love between a Nigerian mother and her daughter, who lives in another country. I called Emeka. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been worried. I told him I was fine. He told me the tuition was sorted. Someone paid it, he said, confused, checking his portal 3 times to make sure. He didn't know yet. I didn't tell him. I cried after both calls. Very quietly, into the hospital pillow, facing the wall. Not because of the pain, though the ribs made breathing feel like a negotiation. Because of the strange, disorienting experience of being taken care of. I want to tell you something about growing up the way I did. In a house where you are the eldest daughter, the capable one, the one who figures things out, you stop waiting for someone else to do the figuring. You become the solution to your own problems so automatically that eventually you forget you could want anything different. Seoul didn't change that. Seoul amplified it. Because in this city, when you are foreign and brown and working a delivery scooter at midnight, you learn to make yourself small in ways that keep you safe. You learn to take up exactly the space you're supposed to take up, and no more. Kim Dae-hyun was a man who had apparently decided, without consulting me, that I deserved to take up considerably more space than I'd been given. I didn't know what to do with that. He visited every other day. Never long. He would sit in the chair by the window. Always that chair, always that particular quality of stillness, and he would ask questions. About my studies. About Emeka. About Enugu. About what I thought of Seoul. Nobody in Seoul had asked me what I thought of Seoul. They either told me what to think about it, or they didn't think to ask at all. I told him about the neon in Hongdae, how it looked like someone had taken a photograph of joy and made it architectural. I told him about the specific loneliness of Mapo-gu at 2 a.m., how full the city was of people, and how empty it managed to feel anyway. I told him that Korean had 17 ways to express varying degrees of deference and only a few comfortable ways to express something as simple as I am angry and I am right. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "That's more than most Koreans notice." Now, let me tell you what happened to the men who put me on that hospital floor. I will not dress this up in false modesty. I will not pretend that when I found out, and I found out everything, eventually, that my primary emotion was discomfort. I was raised to be a good Christian girl, with a healthy respect for the concept of leaving vengeance to the Lord. But I am also the daughter of a woman who, when our landlord in Enugu tried to take our family's land through a falsified deed, hired the sharpest lawyer in Anambra State and sat in that courtroom every single day for 8 months with the specific, patient intensity of someone who has already decided how the story ends. The Lord's vengeance, in our family, often works through very specific instruments. What I'm saying is, when I tell you that Kim Dae-hyun was systematic, I understood it. I respected it. On a cellular level. Here is what I was told. Here is what I know. The 2 men were members of a crew operating in the Mapo-gu area, affiliated with a mid-level gang structure that had, over the preceding 2 years, been running a quiet extortion operation on smaller businesses in the financial district fringe. Construction suppliers. Logistics subcontractors. Small freight companies. They had targeted me, specifically because they had seen me delivering to KDH Logistics multiple times. In the logic of people who understand the world through the language of territory and association, I was adjacent to an empire they had been trying, unsuccessfully, to pressure at its edges. Hurting me was a message. The kind of message that assumes no one important will notice the messenger was harmed, because the messenger is invisible. They miscalculated. What Dae-hyun did first was not violent. He was far too precise for blunt force as an opening move. He started with the subcontracting network. 3 of the 4 companies the crew had been extorting were, through 2 or 3 corporate layers, connected to KDH Logistics supply chains. Within 10 days of my hospital admission, all 3 had received formal notice of contract termination, not for any stated reason related to what had happened to me, but for supply chain restructuring and vendor consolidation.
Clean.
Legal. Undeniable. The fourth company, a small cold storage facility in western Seoul, received a buyout offer at fair value the same week. They accepted. They were grateful. They had no idea. The crew's income from these sources eliminated. The building they operated out of, a commercial property in Yeongdeungpo, was owned by a shell company that Dae-hyun's legal team identified within 72 hours. The owner of that shell company had a pending commercial lease renewal for 2 other properties, both of which had landlords with banking relationships connected, through normal Korean financial infrastructure, to institutions that moved a great deal of freight insurance through KDH-affiliated brokers. Those lease renewals were not renewed. The building was sold.
Quickly.
To a buyer whose name, if you knew Seoul's commercial property world, made the implications perfectly clear. These 2 things alone, the contract eliminations and the property movement, did not make newspaper headlines. They were not supposed to. They were the structural dismantling of a foundation, quiet and complete, the way you remove load-bearing walls before the building realizes it has nothing left to stand on. The violence, when it came, was not theatrical.
I was not there for it. I want to be precise about that.
I was in a hospital bed in Asan Medical Center, watching Korean dramas on the room television, and eating the juk that the nurses brought me at mealtimes, and trying to figure out what my left hand was feeling when Dae-hyun asked me about my linguistics thesis. What I know is that by the end of my 3rd week of recovery, both men had been located, identified, and met with. I was told to use this word, and I am choosing to use it, by people who communicated to them the full measure of what they had done, and the full measure of who had noticed. I was told they would not be a problem again. The tone in which this was told to me, by Dae-hyun's lieutenant, a composed young man named Kong who appeared to have been assembled entirely from efficiency and dark tailoring, communicated that not a problem again was, in this context, a permanent condition. The leader of the broader crew, a man 3 levels above the 2 who had found me on that service road, the man who had ordered the message be sent, had his 2 largest financial backers receive a private meeting with representatives of KDH Logistics legal division. In that meeting, certain documentation was produced. Financial documentation. The kind of documentation that, if shared with the Financial Intelligence Unit of the Korea Financial Services Commission, would initiate a very serious and very public process. No sharing occurred. A different kind of understanding was reached.
Again, permanent.
I asked Dae-hyun about this directly, one afternoon in my 4th week, when I was sitting up without wincing and the Gangnam rain was coming down the window in gray sheets, and he was in his usual chair looking at his phone. Asked him if he did this because he felt responsible, because I was outside his building, because he had some obligation to fulfill. He looked up from his phone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I did it because they looked at you and thought you didn't matter." He looked back at his phone. I needed them to understand their mistake. I left the hospital on a Wednesday. Dae-hyun drove me himself. No driver. Just his black car. The kind of silence that exists between people who have already said enough to change the nature of what they are to each other, and the rain-soaked bridge over the Han River. He asked where I wanted to go. I told him I wanted to go to my apartment. The small, cluttered, perpetually cold apartment in Sinchon where my Korean English Igbo flashcards were still stuck to the wall above my desk and Mapo-gu's spare parts were in a box in the corner. Mapo-gu, whom his people had, I was informed without my asking, retrieved and repaired. He drove me there. He pulled up outside. Engine running. I got out. I stood on the pavement in the January air, still cold, still serious, still full of opinions about me. I was wearing a coat 3 sizes too large that had appeared in my hospital room without explanation, and which was the best coat I had ever owned. I turned back to the car window. I said, "In Nigeria, we say," and then I stopped, because the specific Igbo phrase that had come to my mind did not translate cleanly into Korean or English, and I was standing on a wet pavement with cracked ribs that were nearly healed, and I didn't have the words in any of my 4 languages for what I was trying to say. He waited. I said, "My grandmother used to say that the worst thing is to go through your whole life without anyone truly seeing you. Not your usefulness. Not your function. Just you." He looked at me through that window for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I see you, Ifeoma." And he drove away before I could respond. Because that is who Kim Dae-hyun is. A man who delivers the most profound sentences of your life and then disappears into Seoul traffic before you can collect yourself enough to answer. I stood on that wet pavement for a long time. I thought about the first time I rode Mapo-gu over the Han River Bridge at night, 6 months before, when the city's lights were doubled in the dark water and Seoul felt enormous and indifferent, and I felt approximately the size of a thumbprint on its surface. I thought about invisible, about furniture, about making yourself small enough to fit through all the spaces a city leaves for people like me. I thought about the sound of a black card on a hospital desk, about tea in a paper cup on a cold curb, about the specific look on a man's face when he understood what had been done to something that belonged to his protection. About I see you. This is not a love story. Not yet. It is a story about what happens when a woman who has spent years making herself invisible is finally, fully, terrifyingly seen. It is a story about a city that chews you up if you let it, and about the people, unexpected, strange, overwhelming, who decide you deserve to take up more space than the city allotted you. It is a story about $500,000 and what money looks like when it's not about money at all. It is a story about Ifeoma, who came to Seoul for a scholarship and ended up understanding something her grandmother tried to teach her at 7 years old, that being truly seen is the most dangerous, most exhilarating, most necessary thing that can happen to a person. And Kim Dae-hyun? He called 2 days later. He said he had a position. A real one. Research and partnerships. Full contract. Relocation allowance. An office, an actual office, with a window, on the 38th floor of KDH Logistics. I said, "Are you hiring me because you feel guilty?" He said, "I'm hiring you because you know how this city actually works. Because you delivered to 47 buildings in 3 districts in 6 months, and you notice things no one in my strategy division has ever noticed. Because you are the most capable person I have met in recent memory, and you have been wasting that capability delivering jjangmyeon at midnight." A pause. "And also," he said, "because I want to keep seeing you." I told him I would think about it. I told Mapo-gu I would think about it. Mapo-gu, freshly repaired and gleaming in my apartment's narrow hall, said nothing. But I felt her approval. If you are watching this from Seoul, from Lagos, from Abuja, from anywhere that has ever made you feel like you were part of the furniture, I want you to know something. The story is not over. It is never over at the moment it feels most finished. Ifeoma is still figuring out what it means to be seen by a man who sees everything. To be protected by someone whose nature is to occupy 38th floor space when your whole life has been lived in service corridors. That tension between the person you built in the dark and the person someone else sees in the light is where the story really begins. And we are only just starting. Drop a comment. Have you ever been part of the furniture in a place that later changed your life? Tell me your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because Melanin stories are just getting started.